Not every miracle arrives with trumpets. Sometimes it enters slowly, like a breath we barely notice. And that's exactly how Elizabeth's story began. A woman who had already lost almost everything, except the pain. At 57 years old, she found herself hospitalized for the third time in less than 4 months. The diagnosis was relentless: advanced cancer, resistant to nearly every treatment. But what truly hurt wasn't the body. It was the feeling that, along with her health, she had also lost God's attention. And on that overcast morning, while the medical team adjusted her monitors, Elizabeth looked up at the white ceiling and whispered a phrase that could pierce any attentive soul. "The truth is, even God doesn't hear me anymore." The nurse beside her pretended not to hear. But Elizabeth wasn't expecting a human response. Her whisper wasn't directed at anyone visible. It was almost a surrender, a confession aimed at the invisible, at the heavens. In the previous days, no one had come to visit her. Friends had slowly disappeared. Family, already worn out, sent occasional empty messages. And the prayers she once made, now shorter each time, seemed to die at the hospital ceiling. There were no more signs, no more presence. Only the question remained: if God is with me, why the silence? But what Elizabeth didn't yet know, and maybe you don't know either, is that God's silence often comes just before his most powerful signs. And some of those signs don't arrive in words. They arrive through windows. She just needed to reach the right room. If you're still watching this, maybe you're carrying a similar silence. Maybe you too are waiting for a sign, for a movement from heaven in the middle of a hospital that only offers medicine and protocols. And if that's the case, allow me to say something with all respect. Maybe this video didn't effing you by chance. Maybe it's exactly what your weary heart asked for, in silence. So right now, write your name in the comments, or the name of the person you carry in your heart. Share if you've lived something similar, or if you're still waiting for a sign. Let's create together a living chain of faith, where every name becomes a prayer, every story becomes intercession, and every comment transforms into a sacred act of hope. And if this message has touched you in any way, click the like button now, not for me, but so the algorithm shows this video to someone who's desperately needing a sign today. Elizabeth didn't know it, but the morning when she felt her deepest abandonment would mark the beginning of something far greater than she could imagine. And it didn't come through doctors, nor through sermons. It came through a window no one paid attention to anymore. A forgotten window, in a forgotten room, for a soul that believed it had been forgotten too. But maybe the answer was already closer than she imagined. The next day, without any explanation given to the patient, Elizabeth was moved to another room. The doctors said it was part of a reorganization of the floor. But to her, it didn't feel like a minor detail. The new room, number 412, felt different. The walls had a faint beige tone, older than the others. It was quieter, fewer people. And the only available bed was positioned near a window, fogged by time, rarely opened. That window was just like her, aged, forgotten, ignored. But something about it drew Elizabeth's attention, a kind of silent presence, as if even while shut it was trying to say something. During the first few days, Elizabeth stared at that window the way someone stares at a grave, with respect, but without hope. Until, on a particularly windy afternoon, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. No matter how much light tried to come in, the glass seemed to filter everything. No direct sunlight, no full illumination. It was as if that window, just like her faith, had been locked from the inside. In one especially difficult night, after hearing that the new medication hadn't worked, Elizabeth looked at the window with exhausted eyes. The heart monitor beeped like a purposeless clock. Outside, only darkness. Yet still, with a faint voice and no ritual, she whispered, "If you still care, give me a sign. Any sign. But please, don't let me die thinking I was forgotten." She wasn't expecting an answer. Only the relief of having said something, of still being able to call God by name, even if her soul was cracked. And maybe because of that, for the first time in many months, she fell asleep in peace. A strange kind of peace. Silent, but one that would not come alone. The next morning, as she opened her eyes with effort, Elizabeth saw something different stuck outside the window. Her heart sped up without warning. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. She asked the nurse to check. Was there really something out there? A piece of paper, maybe an envelope. Small, wet from the night's dew, but real. And its exact position matched the very spot on the window where she had prayed just hours earlier. The nurse couldn't explain. She said the hospital doesn't allow such things and maybe someone had placed it there by mistake. But Elizabeth knew, or rather, she felt it. This wasn't a mistake. It was an answer, not one sent by doctors, not one made of logic. It was something only faith could decode, a language only those with broken hearts can understand. They say, if heaven had chosen to write through a window. In that moment, she asked to be left alone. She wanted to look at the envelope a little longer before touching it. She was afraid of ruining the mystery, but at the same time, she was thirsty to feel it. And in that mix of fear and hope, Elizabeth understood. Maybe the miracle wasn't outside, not in the healing. Maybe the miracle was believing again. And if even a forgotten window could carry an answer, who are we to question how God chooses to speak? But what she found there wasn't just an object. It was an answer. Elizabeth waited until the shift changed. Only then, with still fragile fingers and restless eyes, she asked the new nurse for help in slightly opening the window. She didn't want the envelope to fall, or for whatever was inside to be lost. The nurse, hesitant at first, gave in. She gently pushed the stiff, stuck window, allowing Elizabeth to reach the piece of paper that had withstood wind, dew, and neglect to remain right there. The envelope was plain, brown, no logo, slightly damp, as if it had survived the night, just to fulfill a mission. Elizabeth picked it up with reverence. No name, no date, only the sense that this piece of paper held something beyond ink. Maybe a destiny, maybe a response. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, carefully folded. In the center of the page, written with a blue pen that was almost running out, were the words, "He never forgot you." Just that. Nothing else. But for someone like Elizabeth, those 4 words were enough to break months of silence, enough to cut through the thickness of pain. She hadn't cried since the day she received her final diagnosis. But now, standing before that message, so simple yet devastating, tears fell freely, as if someone had unlocked a dam she didn't even realize was still there. She pressed the paper against her chest, took a deep breath, said nothing, but something inside her began to shift. It was as if a piece of heaven had slipped in through that narrow crack, and there was no explaining it. Not with science, not with logic. Because only someone who's felt forgotten by God understands what it means to suddenly be remembered. Elizabeth remained silent for the rest of the day, as if hearing something. Inside her soul, she didn't want to interrupt. She placed the note inside the Bible she kept in her bag, even though she hadn't opened it in years. And for the first time since being admitted, she fell asleep without needing pain medication. The next morning, one of the nurse aides commented, "You look different today. Did something happen?" Elizabeth answered with only a small smile. "Maybe. God sent me a letter." The aide chuckled, thinking it was just a figure of speech. But it wasn't. It was literal. And even if no one else believed it, she knew. And that was enough. That afternoon, she asked for the Bible to be placed beside her bed, opened. Not to read, just to remember, so that the whole room would know she had been remembered. It's strange how 4 words can reverse abandonment, how a handwritten page can heal a wounded soul. But faith has always been like that, strange, unpredictable, and powerful. And Elizabeth, who just the week before had whispered, "Even," God doesn't hear me anymore, now repeated softly like a mantra. He never forgot me. But what she didn't yet know was that those words were only the beginning, because behind that trembling handwriting, there was a story. And behind that story, a woman who prayed through windows. But something was still missing. A truth hidden between the lines. Something that would only come later. On the fourth day in room 412, Elizabeth noticed something curious. Every morning between 7 and 8, a woman in a light blue uniform would pass discreetly by her door. She didn't enter like the nurses. She waited patiently. And when she finally stepped in, she moved with a kind of reverence Elizabeth hadn't seen before. It was as if this woman cleaned more than the floor, as if she left something behind, beyond hygiene. That day, Elizabeth did something she hadn't done in a long time. She spoke first. "Good morning. What's your name?" The woman smiled without looking up, still gently mopping the floor. "Diana. I'm part of the cleaning staff. Did you leave something on my window?" Diana paused, just for a second, but it was enough for Elizabeth to notice she had hit a tender spot. The woman hesitated, took a deep breath, and answered sincerely, "I did, but I didn't know who was in the room. I just felt someone needed to read it." Elizabeth fell, silent. She didn't know what to say. She had expected any answer except that one. Diana set down her mop. She sat on a small bench near the wall and spoke with calm sincerity. "Sometimes, while I clean the rooms, I pray quietly. I ask God to show me who needs a word, and sometimes I leave notes, simple ones. I don't sign them, I don't tell anyone. It's not part of my job, but it's part of my faith." Elizabeth clutched the edge of her blanket. That revelation ran deeper than it sounded. But why that night? Diana looked at the window as if reliving the moment. "I had already finished my shift, but something made me go back. Something pushed me toward that side of the building. And I had that envelope with me. I didn't know why. Now I do." The two women sat in silence, but a different kind of silence. One filled with meaning, with reverence. "You know, Miss Elizabeth," Diana continued, "I don't have a degree or a theology diploma, just my broom, and a faith that never let me give up. And if God wants to use even a janitor to say that he's still near, so be it. I'm just a messenger." Elizabeth couldn't hold back the emotion. "You have no idea what that meant to me. I felt dead inside. I thought even God had walked away." Diana stood and gently touched Elizabeth's hand. "He never walked away. Sometimes it's us who stop opening the window." That afternoon, Elizabeth remained thoughtful. The woman who cleaned the hospital had also cleaned something inside her, as if the words left on the envelope had now gained a voice, a face, a testimony. And something within her began to reorganize. Doubt started to lose ground to a kind of faith that didn't come from arguments, but from gestures, from encounters that defy explanation. Before leaving the room, Diana looked once more at the window and said, "Keep watching that window, Miss Elizabeth. God has a strange way of speaking, but he speaks. And sometimes, he starts through a crack we least expect." And just as she entered, she left, without fanfare, without seeking credit, but leaving behind the kind of presence that lingers, even after the door has closed. Elizabeth glanced at the paper still tucked inside her Bible, and she noticed something she hadn't before. The handwriting trembled, but carried strength. It was like her own heart, fragile but not defeated. And maybe that was the first miracle. And what God knew was deeper than Elizabeth could ever imagine. That night came colder than the others. Elizabeth no longer felt sharp physical pain. The palliative care was helping. But something new had begun to ache. Absence, not the absence of people, but of answers, of direction. She had received a note, a touch of faith, an encounter with a woman who seemed heaven-sent. And yet, The hole inside her still begged for more, as if the soul had awakened, but was still hungry. It was that night that something strange happened. Elizabeth dreamed. In the dream, she was outside the hospital, standing right in front of the window of room 412. The window wasn't foggy. It was made of crystal clear glass, as if washed by light. And inside the room, she saw herself, fragile, lying down, with the Bible in her lap. But the most striking detail was something else. There was a table by the wall, and on it, an open Bible, lit by a golden beam of light passing through the glass. Elizabeth, still dreaming, moved closer. The text was legible, but before she could read it, she woke up, sweating, breathless, but with a strange urge she couldn't explain. She pulled the Bible from the drawer, the one she had kept for days, along with the note. She closed her eyes and opened it randomly. The sound of the page turning felt like a whisper, and when her eyes landed on the verse, she froze. The words were there, exactly as in the dream, as if they had been planted for that very moment, as if heaven had waited for that precise second to speak to her. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Elizabeth covered her mouth. She could barely breathe. It was as if everything around her had gone silent, so that verse could echo within her. The Lord is close. But how? How could God be close when she felt so much absence? And then came the understanding. He didn't come closer when the pain ended. He came closer because there was pain. It was the pain that made room for his presence. It was the brokenness that drew the rescue. And in that moment, the note made even more sense. He never forgot you. It wasn't just comfort. It was the foreshadowing of a greater revelation. And now she knew what she had received. A promise. Elizabeth sat up slowly. She touched the verse with her fingers, as if recognizing an old scar, and smiled, for the first time, with truth. Not because she was healed, but because she now knew she wasn't alone. If you've made it this far, maybe you too are waiting for something that still hasn't come. Maybe you feel like your prayers echo into nothing, your suffering has no answer, and your soul is wandering in valleys too, dark to walk through alone. But listen closely. Psalm 34:18 says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And if that's where your heart is, then He is there, with you, right now. Close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and pray this with me, even if only in silence. Lord, I don't ask for explanations, I only ask for your presence. If my heart is broken, then please enter through the cracks, heal what no one else sees, speak where only silence remains, and show me today that I am not forgotten. Amen. If this prayer spoke to you, write your name in the comments, or the name of someone you love who needs comfort right now. Share your story too, even if it's short. Let's build a network of invisible faith, where each name becomes a cry and every word becomes a hug. And that verse, it wasn't just a response, it was a calling. The next morning, Elizabeth didn't ask for coffee or for medicine. She asked for silence. The Bible was still open to the same verse, but now, beyond the written word, there was a new light in her eyes. A kind of faith that doesn't come from explanation, but from experience. It wasn't joy. It wasn't certainty. It was something rougher, raw, a surrender without guarantees, like loving again, even knowing the risk of being hurt. She looked toward the window. The glass was still fogged. The view outside hadn't changed, but inside her, everything was new territory. And in that moment, as if speaking to someone truly present, she said, I don't know how to pray beautifully anymore. I don't have the right words. I just miss believing. What came out of her mouth wasn't a traditional prayer. It had no structure, no beginning, middle, or end. It was more like a lament turned into an offering, pain, trying to make peace, with hope. If you're still here, then stay. You don't even have to speak, just stay. Because now I understand what hurt the most wasn't the illness, it was thinking you had left. She held tightly to the paper where she had written Psalm 34:18, and with eyes full of tears but steady, she said something that felt like it traveled through the air. "I don't need healing today. I just need company." And maybe that's the kind of prayer many people never make, because the world teaches us to ask for results, for proof, for visible miracles. But there's a kind of miracle that only those who've truly suffered can recognize: the presence of God in the middle of the silence. And if you, listening to this now, have also reached that point where you no longer ask for solutions, just want to know if God is still there, know this: that's a prayer too. Even without words, even with your eyes. Because God hears the screams, but He also deciphers the whispers. So if you feel like you've lost your faith, don't condemn yourself. Just say this sincerely: "Lord, I don't know how to believe anymore, but I still want to." That desire, even if small, is enough for Him to start again with you. Elizabeth didn't know how many more days she had to live, but that day, she experienced an invisible miracle. She prayed again. Even without full faith, even without certainty, but with a broken heart. And that was already the beginning of everything. But Elizabeth's journey wasn't over yet. It was a Sunday morning when Elizabeth asked something unusual of the nurse on duty: to open the window. The nurse, surprised, explained that the window had been stuck for years and that no one ever paid attention to it. But Elizabeth insisted, not with stubbornness, but with a calm certainty, as if she knew the gesture had greater meaning. "Just try. Please, even just a little." The nurse retrieved an old key from the nursing station. She stepped up on a small ladder and, with some effort, turned the latch that hadn't moved in a long time. The sound was dry, almost symbolic. And when she pushed the glass, a stream of fresh air swept through the room like a breath of life. And with it, a ray of sunlight cut through the space and fell exactly on the open Bible in Elizabeth's lap. The verse was still there, Psalm 34:18. But now it wasn't just words. It was a visible testimony. The light illuminated the passage with a precision as if she had planned it. The nurse stepped back, visibly moved. "Wow, that was beautiful," she whispered. Elizabeth didn't reply. She simply closed her eyes and let the tears fall silently. They weren't tears of sadness, nor relief. They were tears of someone who, for the first time in a long time, felt seen, not by doctors, not by family, but by something greater. Something that blew through the window, straight to the soul. It was as if heaven was saying, "You asked for a sign. I gave you all of them. Now, you just need to open up." And there she was, standing before the simplest and yet most powerful miracle of her life. The certainty that God had never left. It was she, deep down, who had shut herself in. It was in that very moment that Elizabeth understood something words could never teach. God's presence doesn't always remove the pain, but it redefines what pain means. And with that, a new kind of strength is born. One that doesn't shout, that doesn't display itself, but stays. The nurse asked if she wanted to close the window. Elizabeth smiled. "No, leave it open. It's been a long time since I felt the wind like this. A long time since I breathed with hope." She spent the rest of the afternoon with the window open, even as the light chill of the evening crept in. She asked for a blanket, but didn't want them to close it. She said she needed that air, that light, that symbolic restart. And to every patient who passed in the hallway, she would whisper, "Today, God came through here, and He didn't enter with sound. He entered with sunlight." If you're hearing this right now, maybe your window is stuck too. Maybe your faith is rusty. And maybe what's missing isn't an answer, but a gesture. Try opening your window, even if it's from the inside, even if it's just a crack. If this word found space in your heart, write in the comments, "Lord, open in me what I've closed." Maybe it's fear, pain, or exhaustion. It doesn't matter. God knows every eye, lock, every fold of the soul. And sometimes all we need is to reopen the window. A few days later, Elizabeth was discharged from the intensive care unit and transferred again. This time, back to the same room where everything had begun. There was no declared medical miracle. The tumor was still there. The disease had not disappeared. But she was different. The way she faced the hours, the diagnoses, the glances from the staff, everything had changed. And there was something she needed to do before leaving that place. On her last morning in room 412, she asked for paper, a pen, and a piece of tape. The nurse was puzzled, but obliged. Elizabeth sat in the armchair by the window, took a deep breath, and began to write, calmly, as if etching something she didn't want time to erase. Her hands, still weak, shaped the words with care. She wasn't worried about perfection or grammar, only intention. And when she finished, she folded the page precisely. She stood slowly, with the nurse's help, and taped the note to the exact same spot where she had found the first one. On it, she wrote, "If you're reading this, know that he heard you too. I also thought I was alone, but I was remembered through a note. Maybe this is yours. Don't give up. Heaven still listens." She didn't sign it, didn't leave a name. But as she placed that paper on the window, she felt she was leaving more than just a message. She was leaving an open cycle of faith, ready to restart in someone else. At the time of her departure, Elizabeth hugged Diana. The cleaning woman smiled and said, "I knew you'd understand. This is what I call invisible planting. We scatter the seeds and never know who will harvest. Someone will, Diana. And when they do, maybe they'll leave another letter too." They said goodbye in a long embrace. And that day, as Elizabeth walked the corridor toward the exit, something unexpected happened. A young nurse, visibly moved, approached her with her phone in hand. She showed a YouTube video. In it, a narration told the story of a woman who had been touched by a verse, Psalm 34:18. At the end, hundreds of comments filled the screen like, "A tide of faith. My dad is in a coma, but I believe God is close to him. I wrote my name here. Please, whoever reads this, pray for me. My daughter came out of the ICU after I recited this psalm every day. Glory to God. I believe. Amen." Elizabeth read it with tears in her eyes, and she understood. What began as a note in the window was now reaching the entire world. People in houses, in hospitals, in quiet homes. People exhausted, but still standing. People who might have felt exactly as she did weeks before, forgotten. But now, the chain had formed. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "I believe he still hears me." And if you know someone who needs this reminder, send them this video. Maybe today, you are the letter someone else is waiting to find. Leave a like. Because it's not just a gesture. It's a confirmation that this window is still open, and that God still responds. This video may be the window someone is waiting for. Share it with someone who needs a sign. Maybe you are the answer someone prayed for.